Cardistry is real fucking hard. Like, let's just be honest. Like, it's really hard. Like, I think a lot of people doing it for a long time don't recognize how high the skill, like, climb is to get semi-decent. Like, you start off and, like, you spend years being, like, just really unsatisfactorily bad.
That was Eliot Slevin. Eliot's been a part of the community for over a decade and is responsible for creating sqooze as well as assembly playing cards. He's been around for a long time and has a lot of knowledge, and I think you guys will really love this episode. First off, I'd like to open up with a question I like to ask everybody, and I know it's one that people asked to hear about when I was asking Instagram what they wanted to hear, and that's just talking about the creative process and kind of how do you make a move if you go about making a move.
When you sit down and you get a deck of cards, just like in your day-to-day life, there's kind of, I think you can kind of go into two modes. There's the mode where you just do cardistry, and you just practice cardistry, and you just go through the motions, and often you're not kind of critically thinking about it. You're kind of just flowing. You're just doing it. And then there's the other state of cardistry where you sit down with the deck and you're actively engaging in it. And you're engaging and creating and trying to come up with ideas, kind of go down the pathways that you don't naturally want to go because you don't have the muscle memory to do them, and find something interesting. And quite frankly, I pick up a deck of cards and I'm always just practice mode. I'm always just like going through the process of actually doing cardistry. I spend very little time actually sort of sitting down and being like, let's create a move, or like, let's find something interesting or find something new. And as a result of that, because it's like a skill, right? Like, there's people, like, you know, I think of people like Samuel Pratt and like Matt Samuel, all the Samuels, and they're just really good at the actual process of creation. Like, they can really just turn it on. They can be like, cool, we're creating now. As you know, as you might know, like Matt Samuel did the whole like cut a day kind of thing, where every day he's like, I'm going to make a move. I'm going to make a new move in a really short amount of time and get it out there no matter what. And like, that's just not for me, hey? I'm 100% just an intuitive move creator, where I'll just sit down, flow around, find something interesting, and then just keep kind of going down that angle. So yeah, I don't have a process at all.
I've talked about this on this show before, that there's people that like create things, and then there's also people that kind of perfect the things that they either made or have learned. I think what I see a lot with you, or I think most people would see with you, is like your moves, you tend to be really smooth, not necessarily smooth, but they have a really nice tempo to them, in my opinion. I think that might be just from the repetition of fiddling around.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is like, the enjoyment you get from cardistry, right? So like, I enjoy doing cardistry. Have you heard of something called flow state? It's like a mental mode.
Yeah.
I enjoy it because of the flow state aspect. I enjoy it when, you know, you hit that move perfectly and you just keep going and you don't have pauses in between the moves. You just go and go and go and go and go. You know, listening to music while you're thinking about something else. Like, I have like decks of cards at my work, and I'll sit down on my computer, I'll be thinking about a problem, I'm just shuffling like all fucking day. But yeah, that enjoyment comes from that intrinsic activity of hitting that kind of flow state, of hitting that, you know, nailing the move, getting the enjoyment. And so as a result of that, I really don't like doing hard moves. Like, I'll have cards. I used to have cards which were like quite complicated, and I still do them, but I'd make things simpler. Like, I'll simplify moves a lot to be able to do them more comfortably, to be able to do them easier, to be able to do them faster. Which is interesting because, I think this really like cardistry has this kind of motivation aspect. Like, why are you doing cardistry? What do you enjoy about it? And the reality is, like, I don't think, like, cardistry is real fucking hard. Like, let's just be honest. Like, it's really hard. Like, I think a lot of people doing it for a long time don't recognize how high the skill, like, climb is to get semi-decent. Like, you start off and, like, you spend years being, like, just really unsatisfactorily bad before you get anywhere good. And I think a lot of people think, you know, they'll see some Cardist and they'll think, oh man, like, that's so cool, like, I want to do that. and like I'm gonna practice harder than anyone else. Like I'm so motivated to do this, and I'm just gonna push and push. I'm gonna put in the hours. I'm gonna get good. But like that kind of motivation angle, I feel doesn't work for a lot of people because the hill is so huge to climb. Like going from like 0 to decent is years, like years of your life, on this really bizarre hobby that like nobody else really in the world understands. Like I think there's a very good reason why most people get into cardistry when they're a teenager. It's because no like living adult with a job and responsibilities and shit would be like, oh, I just discovered this thing called cardistry. Let's give it a go. Like I know a few people have done that, but they're really exceptions to the case. That motivation aspect, like I enjoy doing cardistry because of its intrinsic motivations. Like it's intrinsically fun to do. It's enjoyable. It's relaxing. It's, you know, mindfulness. It's arguably a meditative process. Like I find it very good to do as kind of like a relaxation or a way to sort of focus on something else that I'm thinking about. And it's actually really interesting because like Instagram came along to the world of cardistry, and it added this really super obvious extrinsic motivation. It added this way of like getting good feeling from doing cardistry that's not controlled by yourself. I'm not 100% sure if that's always a good thing.
I don't think it is.
Yeah. So yeah, like a lot of my moves are made to really just optimize that intrinsic motivation pathway for myself, because that's just what I like doing. Like, you know, there's moves that are hard and I just don't practice them. I just don't do them. And that's not to say that I don't do hard moves. Like, I have some like pretty hard moves, but like I really enjoy nailing them, and that makes them fun. But yeah, moves, structures, things that break the flow, things that slow it down, things that just that kind of like, you know, that little stumbling block in the cut. Like I'm like, nah, cut it, don't do it. Like roll with it. Yeah, like, so for example, my move squeeze, right? There's a variation of Darren's cut squoze. My move squoze, variation of Darren cut squeeze. That was me learning squeeze, and being like, oh, I like this, but it has too many stopping points. And so I just started doing it differently, and that's how it happened. Like, I didn't sit down and create that move from thin air. It's entirely just like, let's get this cut and smooth it out. Let's just make it really, really easy and simple to execute so that it's more enjoyable for myself.
What's it like squoze? I don't know that's necessarily a beginner move, but it's like a really well-known move that a lot of people can associate with. What's it kind of like being the creator of something well-known in the community?
It's interesting because like it was a real slow burn. Like I was at my dad's place for Christmas or something, and I was like, oh yeah, let's just record a video, record a little tutorial, put it out. And like, it really didn't get like a whole bunch of exposure right away. Like it didn't really get people learning it from day one. But I don't know, YouTube algorithm just kind of latched onto it, and it slowly just grew and grew and grew. Like a lot of people have learned it now, and I've seen a lot of people do it. It's good, yeah. Like it's really, really good. And I think really shows the value of making tutorials. Like back in the day in cardistry, people would like, you know, try and make tutorials and sell them, or they'd make tutorials and have them, you know, released alongside a product or something. And the kind of financial desire to make tutorials are really slowing down. Like no one pays for a tutorial these days. Or like a DVD, something like that. Remember that in videos? It'd be like, yeah, I've got 14 moves, buy my VHS. But I think it shows that tutorials are really great thing for people to make just as content, because they're just such a slow burn. Like they'll just keep ticking over. And I think a lot of brands just spend more time doing them. In terms of like being known of making it, like it's the same old. Like it doesn't really make too much of a difference. Like to be honest. Like I'll see some people doing it. I'm like, that's cool. I gotta admit, I've never really seen anyone execute it, and I've been like, yeah, bang on, you nailed it. Every single time, I'm like, almost. Like,
I know, like some people where squoze is their favorite move, and it's interesting to be able to talk with like you, the person that made it, or like Kevin Ho with Backdrop, like being able to talk to these people, because even, I don't know, when you released the tour, was it maybe 10 years ago? Yeah,
it was. I can't remember how long ago. It was ages.
But like how these things have cemented themselves in the community, it's quite interesting. And especially you saying like it was a slow burn. Because I think with a lot of people, they release a move that they're really happy with, a tutorial for it, or just release it out, and it doesn't get the reception they expect. But like people don't realize that a lot of this stuff slowly, like you said, it's a slow burn, and slow growth. Especially for tutorials, they continually get views. I've noticed because people are constantly learning stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's lots of value in making making tutorials for like, I guess you could call them slights, like for example, like a one-handed cut, like a really simple one. So it's the kind of thing that you can use to build upon other things. Really tiny little micro motions that can be then kind of assembled into other bigger things. I see a lot of value in doing stuff for that because often it sort of takes just like one new motion or one sort of new one-handed cut concept to really open up a huge sort of range of ideas. Like if you look at like, for example, like Triggered by Oliver, like if you look at how many cuts and slides and combos and things have been made incorporating that move, it's nuts, right? Like I think there's lots of value in putting out those small motions rather than sort of like a big full complete meal and just sort of say, look, here's a little thing you can incorporate. And then so many people have so many ideas of how they can fit that in.
I think what you said with like the one movement like can really change a lot of way you think. I definitely agree with that. I recently, for like the 1-year anniversary of the show, I released a couple of tutorials of moves I've made, and I didn't really notice until like I started to make those tutorials that like I have a scissor cut in like almost all my moves, and I don't even like think about it or notice it until I made the tutorial. So like now I purposely am trying to avoid the scissor cut, but it is funny how like one motion can show up so much in a range of different ideas. And then obviously right now you've been using some assembly cards. I know at least 3 decks. What's kind of the process of designing all those?
In terms of obviously all the backs are different, so it does actually make quite a lot of effort. Like even when I was doing clouded paper, not so much in terms of like sort of critical thinking effort, but sort of more like you have to go through the motion for every single card. So it really does take up a lot of time. But you kind of design a system. So for example, like with Graphic 303, so the design is 3 different shapes, square, circle, or triangle, with 3 different colors, and they also have a unique order. So obviously it can be like this way or this way. So what I did was I assigned a number to every single like combination of, so like red square, yellow circle, green triangle, whatever. And then I put them through like a order generator, so I could generate all the possible combinations. There was like 504. And then I went through and manually kind of stripped them out and then created them like that, because what I really didn't want to happen was to have too much of one color coming through. Like you could randomly generate a deck and it would be randomly really yellow, randomly really red. I needed like an even distribution. So you kind of design a system and you kind of just go through the system. But it's pretty methodical. Even with like the logo ones. So like they've all got these variations of the logo, which were different permutations. So there's something like that with diagonals. I actually had always planned for the assembly logo to be like that. Yeah, like the original logo I first put on clouded paper was always designed to be permutated for every single deck. But you just make a system, right? So like I did X amount with only vertical lines, a certain amount with only horizontal lines, a certain amount with diagonal lines, a certain amount with combinations, and you just kind of set boundaries and then go through the motions pretty much.
I think it's really interesting the decks that you made. I'm a huge fan of like different back design on every card of all 52. Especially as a cardist, I feel like it's just cardistry specific, which I enjoy. But I really like with your decks, even clouded paper, where it all fits to a theme. So like they all look similar, but they are each individually different. A
really good example of this kind of style of design used outside of decks actually is there's this really famous logo designer. I think he made the MasterCard logo actually. But he designed the logo for the Hillary Clinton campaign back in some time period. And he designed the logo in a way that they could alter it for every single state that they were going to. So they would kind of get the system and then customize it. But obviously it has to hit a theme and it has to all feel the same. You have to be able to look at it and think to yourself, oh yes, this is part of this political campaign. And that was just a really great example of that style being shown. But yeah, they all have to fit a family. They have to feel like the same deck of cards.
I know you used Cardamundi to do the customs, to do a little bit lower quantity. I know we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but what was it like working with Cardamundi and getting the smaller quantities, being able to do 3 at once?
Oh, yeah, it was great. Quite frankly, so I met when I was in Hong Kong Cardistry Con. I met Jers from Cardamundi, who's one of the, I don't know what he does there, but he's sort of like the main person in Cardamundi who interacts with the cardistry community. And yeah, he's just a really, really cool dude, and it was really great talking to them and just understanding how it works. And that's when I first started talking to him about digital printing, because I've got these decks I want to make, and like I know they're really niche ideas, like, but I kind of still want to get them on paper, and so it's very challenging to say, you know, I'm going to print 1,000 of one design. Like, if for these 3 cards I printed a combination, I printed 1,200 decks in total. If I'd gone ahead and printed 3,000, I would be in a much trickier situation of having to push out these cards to, quite frankly, a really niche market. Like, there's not many cardists out there that are really truly designed for cardistry. I know there's lots of decks which say, like, yeah, this is a deck for cardistry, this is designed for cardists, but they're also applicable to laymen, to card collectors, to magicians. For example, like the Verts deck, right? Everyone, it's sort of marketed as this deck for cardistry, which it is. It's very much designed for cardistry, but it's not a cardistry-only deck. And I think it gets quite challenging when you start trying to produce cardistry-only decks. Cardistry Touch is an example of a brand that do actually cardistry-only decks. Obviously, all their faces are the same. They don't have faces on them, which was another really interesting thing at the time. But I think the thing that actually started getting people's minds taking over about the concept of, like, yeah, what if all the backs were different, were when squids came out. Because squids, or trainers, as I guess you can also call them, they were so very obviously just for cardistry. Like, you couldn't do anything else with them. And you'll notice from very early on, they actually all had different back designs. And it was easy because you only had to make 4 of them. You didn't have to make 52 or 56 different back designs. And that's kind of when, I think that's actually when I first saw that. I thought, yeah, that's a really fucking cool idea. We should sort of open this up a bit more, have more opportunities. Because there is actually a very limited number of things you can do with a traditional back design. Like, the number of compositions, like, you can really ham it up to ones that have kind of got 2 focal points, ones that have got a center focal point, ones which have pattern, or some sort of like grid structure. The number of compositions is actually really quite low.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting to think about too, when you limit yourself to, you know, being a 2-way back design, or even sometimes 1-way. You're like limiting the possibilities of what you can create.
Yeah, I mean, with this one, it was 504 combinations. That's the potential maximum you can make. I did actually work it out. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, like, cards are actually pretty easy product to produce. You know, they don't go bad, they don't have a shelf life. And digital printing does mean you can now produce them in much smaller quantities. I'd really like to see, you know, more people using custom decks. Like, you do look at a lot of what people use and you see all the same brands popping up all the time, which is great. But, yeah, just upping the variation. Like, why not? Like, I would love the idea of, honestly, if I could produce cards in a much smaller quantity, if I could produce 50 of them at a time, I totally would. I just can't, because you have to print them in a certain number of scale to really make it financially viable.
I think it'll be interesting too to see, like, I mean, Make Playing Cards is obviously has made a lot of strides, in my opinion. If we ever get to the point where, like, custom deck, like, just printing out a custom deck costs similar, I imagine it's always going to be more, but similar to if you would do a big run.
Yeah, I think actually a lot of that will come down to whether people decide to accept their finishing stock as good, and it's really improved so much since the early days. Like, when I used them obviously to make some prototypes when I did clouded paper, and they were okay, but the new prototypes get better and better every year.
I don't know that I've shown this on like, this isn't like mind blowing or anything, but I don't think I've shown this ever before on like video. But like, I custom made. Do you know the show Yu-Gi-Oh?
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I was really into Yu-Gi-Oh, and like the anime, the cards look different, or the cartoon, the cards look different than what they came in real life, like how they came in booster packs and stuff. It's like I had my friend make the design of how they show up on the anime, and then custom made them. This was like really cool for me, and like something like it's not the most best feeling deck, but it feels fine enough, and it's like I'm the only one that has one of these. It's really specific to my childhood. Like this deck like is more special to me than like most US like decks that feel better because it's personal to me.
The other interesting thing actually about feeling, as you say, is like people do get very particular about stocks and finish and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah.
And like when you're making cards, you have to make a decision. For example, like, am I going to use crushed stock? Am I going to use normal stock? And you can never really please everyone. Like there's always someone who's like, oh, you know, it's not the stock for me. And, you know, for a long time, I think even Cardammundi's cards were considered kind of not as good. People definitely had preferences. But I personally find for, like, how I use cards, like, I like to really break in my cards, like, a lot. They all break in the same, right? Like, the moment you wear off the finish, they're really quite similar. The stock does make a little bit of difference, but how they feel on day one is kind of irrelevant to how they feel 2 months from now. And I think almost every deck, if you do use them for 2 months, they'll feel pretty good. But also, as you use them repeatedly, you kind of build up that memory of how they work. Like you get more acquainted to how they as a deck fit together. So I do find the whole sort of like feel argument a bit silly. And brands do definitely like oversell their like product. Like, you know, you see lots of people who, you know, premium crushed bee stock, premium linoite finish, XYZ. When you actually go and print some cards, they're kind of like, yeah, we've got the stock, we've got the squish stock, and you can have smooth or you can have bumps. Like the actual options provided are way lower than brands make it appear. For example, like digital printing, like these ones. For some reason, illusionists call this like specific finish and stock combination, like the E7 finish or something like that. But it's just standard Cardammundi slimline stock with their standard embossed finish instead of smooth. There isn't really as much variation as it might seem. A lot of it is just kind of random marketing.
Yeah, one thing that always annoys me in like playing card reviews is they'll always rank how it feels, and it's always it feels good and springy, and I'm like, yeah, they're gonna feel exactly the same as like there's minor differences obviously depending on like the paper that they get it from and stuff, but it's all relatively gonna be good.
The way they feel can vary a huge amount the run, like the run itself, right? Like if you get 1,000 decks, they've used a lot of paper. And there's no guarantee that the paper they use for deck 1 will feel like the paper they use for deck 1,000, right? Like, because it's literally like a bit of wood squished down to a certain density. And so will sometimes just randomly be like, this bit feels a little thinner, this bit feels a little thicker. Like, for example, these cards that I printed, these ones feel thinner than these ones, slightly, just a little bit. And I don't think it's just the ink. Like, they're both pretty black and solid. So even within a stock itself, within a run, there's no guarantee they all feel the same. So just because someone like opened a really good pack doesn't mean that even if you open the same pack from the same run, that it will be as good. And usually because when you buy, let's say you buy a brick, you're not buying 12 decks from distributed all among the printing. You're probably getting 12 from the one point in time. So you won't even notice the variations within them unless you buy multiple points again and again and again. I think actually the comment about I guess the point about cardistry being a meditative, mindful practice is an interesting one. Because I've been in the cardistry community for a long time. Like I think I'm coming up to year 13 or 14 or something, maybe 12. I don't know, long enough that I've forgotten. And there's definitely, how do I say this nicely? There's definitely a lot of interesting characters in the cardistry community. Like, there's a lot of people who are like a little bit weird. Like, let's be real, because it is a weird hobby. It's very weird. Like, not many people do it. Like, you know, in New Zealand, this huge country, I can think of 4 or 5 cardists. which is amazing. Back in the day, it used to just be one, which was just me. It's kind of interesting, like, who are the people who are drawn to cardistry? I think they also have a common theme of liking things that are quite hard, like quite challenging, like really tricky video games. Like I know quite a few cardists who are interested in things like speed running, niche, challenging video game stuff like that. And it does also kind of make you think, like, other people who are into cardistry, like, is it sort of good for them in some sense? Like, do people keep doing it because it works for them and who they are? I guess, like, mental health is not something that's talked a lot about in the cardistry community, but it's a quite common topic. Like, I do know quite a few cardists who have their own struggles with mental health, and I would probably say that there's more cases or more instances or more sort of prevalence of this in cardistry than other hobbies, right? And I think that's partially got to do with how niche it is, but I think it's also partially got to do with how it's such a calming thing in some senses, and so people who might be seeking that might be needing it. Yeah, it's not really a question. I guess it's more a comment, thought I've always had.
Eliot, thank you for being on the show. I really think people will gain a lot of knowledge and insight into kind of your thought process, and when it comes to creating cards and making cardistry and performing it. At the end of the show, I like to do what I call rule out the close-up pad, and that just means, is there anything that you would like to promote or any last nugget you would like to leave the audience with?
I mean, if you're interested in my cards, go get some. I think about 25% of the stock's left, so they won't be around forever, but they're definitely there if you're keen on them. Yeah, man, just make some cards, post some shit, get on the gram, put some shit out. Like, cardistry only happens when people actually make it happen, and so we all got to do our part. We all got to post and move. So post some moves.
As always, I'll have links to Eliot's social media and all that stuff in the description, and obviously a link to Assembly Cards if you are interested in the deck. Try to get them before they sell out. Hopefully they're not sold out by the time this is posted, otherwise that'll be awkward. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys learned something. And Eliot, it was a pleasure having you, and we will see you guys later.